Let me be your husband tonight.
But
I heard him whisper softly into my ear. I sat alone at table 23, pulling at my borrowed blue dress that felt too tight. My cousin Helen was getting married at this fancy hotel, and I was so far from the important people that I might as well have been in another city. If you love this story, please subscribe to Bemzy Stories and leave a comment below. Tell me what you think will happen next. Your support helps me bring you more amazing stories. I watched everyone dancing and having fun, but I felt lonely. Being a single mom means I'm alone a lot. My ex-husband Frank left me 4 years ago, and most of my friends disappeared after that. Across the big room, my 5-year-old daughter Rose was spinning around in her pink flower girl dress, giggling with other kids. My Aunt Ruth was watching her. At least Rose was happy. I spent all my money making sure she had a perfect dress and perfect shoes. My dress? Well, I borrowed it from my sister. "You look like you want to run away," a deep voice said behind me. "I've been thinking about escaping too." I turned around so fast I almost knocked over my drink. Standing there was Henry James Bennett, my boss. He was the CEO of Bennett and Associates Publishing, where I worked. He was super rich, super smart, and kind of scary. He was only 35 years old, but everyone said he was a genius. "Mr. Bennett," I said, suddenly aware that my lipstick was probably gone and my dress wasn't expensive like everyone else's. "I didn't think you'd be here." He smiled, and it made him look completely different. At work, he was always serious and professional, but this smile was warm and reached his gray eyes. "Call me Henry, please. We're not at work." He pointed to the bride and groom. "Walter and I were friends in college. I'm the best man. I'm surprised we haven't met before this." I felt embarrassed. Of course Henry knew rich people like my cousin's new husband. Walter's family owned half of Manhattan. Meanwhile, I skipped most of the wedding parties because I couldn't afford fancy gifts or designer clothes. "I've been busy with work," I said quietly, "and Rose keeps me pretty busy." "Rose?" He looked interested. "My daughter." I pointed to the group of kids dancing. "The one in pink who thinks she's a Broadway star." Henry watched her and smiled bigger. "She has your smile, and I can see that determined look you get during our manuscript meetings." I was shocked he noticed anything about me. In 3 years working there, I'd only talked to the CEO maybe 10 times, mostly in elevators. "May I sit?" he asked, pointing to the empty chair next to me. I nodded. Suddenly, I noticed everything. His nice cologne, his perfect tuxedo. The fact that Henry Bennett, the billionaire CEO, wanted to sit with me instead of the fancy people by the bar. "You're Margaret Sullivan, right? From Acquisitions and Development?" He sat down like it was the most natural thing in the world. "You know who I am?" The words came out before I could stop them. His smile got bigger. "I know everyone who finds our best books. That Evergreen Mountain series you got for us last year is doing 32% better than we expected." My mouth dropped open. I'd fought for months to get those romance books approved. Nobody else believed in them. That Henry not only knew about it, but had been tracking how well they did made me feel proud. "Thank you," I said. "I believed in those books when nobody else did." "That's exactly what makes you special." He leaned back, looking at me closely. "But that doesn't explain why you're hiding back here instead of talking to the big publishing names I saw earlier." I took another sip to buy time. The truth that I felt like I didn't belong, that my borrowed dress made me feel like a fake, seemed too sad to say out loud. "Maybe I'm tired of pretending to be someone I'm not," I finally said, surprised by my own honesty. "Everyone here is so perfect. I'm just trying to make it until I can take Rose home to bed." Something changed in Henry's face. "I know exactly what you mean." Sometimes pretending to be perfect feels harder than any real problem. Before I could think about that, something bad happened near the dance floor. Rose was standing there frozen, her beautiful pink dress covered in red wine, tears in her big blue eyes while a waiter said sorry over and over. "Excuse me," I said, already getting up to help, but Henry touched my arm gently. "Let me," he said, pulling out a fancy handkerchief. "I have nieces. I'm good at this." Before I could say no, he walked over to Rose. I watched in amazement as my scary CEO boss knelt down to Rose's height, pulled a quarter from behind her ear like magic, and gave her his handkerchief with a wink. In seconds, Rose was giggling as Henry wiped her dress, telling her something that made her nod seriously. When they came back, Rose was talking excitedly. "Mom, Mr. Henry says the stain is invisible ink that only brave flower girls can see," Rose announced, the problem already forgotten. "Can I go back to Aunt Ruth? We're having a dance contest." "Of course, sweetheart. Just be careful, okay?" After Rose ran off, I turned to Henry. "Thank you. You're really good with kids." "My sister Dorothy has 7-year-old twins," he explained with a shrug. "They're always covered in something sticky or messy. Penny's magic trick crisis was easy." We talked more, and Henry was funny and kind. He wasn't scary at all. He told me stories about his nieces and asked about Rose. For the first time in years, I didn't feel alone at a party. Then my phone buzzed. My babysitter, the one who was supposed to watch Rose if I stayed late, had canceled. Family emergency. "What's wrong?" Henry asked. "My babysitter canceled," I explained. "I need to find someone else or take Rose home, but my apartment is an hour away and she's having so much fun." Henry thought for a moment. "I have a hotel suite here for after the wedding. You and Rose could use it if you need to stay. I'll be staying at Walter's family place tonight. The suite would just sit empty." I stared at him. Was this okay? But his face showed he just wanted to help. "That's very nice, but I couldn't—" "Margaret," he said gently, "I'll be gone all night. You'd be helping me by using it instead of letting it go to waste." A photographer came over. "Let's get a picture of you two," he said cheerfully, thinking we were married. Before I could correct him, Henry's hand found mine under the table. He leaned close and whispered in my ear, words that would change everything. "Pretend I'm your husband tonight, just for the wedding. It'll be easier than explaining. I've seen how people look at you with pity because you're alone." My heart was beating so fast. This was my boss. This could cause problems. But another part of me, the part that had been lonely for 3 years, eating dinner alone, going to school events alone, that part whispered, "Just once, wouldn't it be nice to pretend?" "Okay," I heard myself say, "just for tonight." Henry smiled and put his arm around my waist for the photo. "Trust me," he said softly. "By morning, no one will pity Margaret Sullivan anymore." What we didn't know was that this one night of pretending would uncover secrets that could either tear us apart or bring us together forever. My evening became completely different after that. Within an hour, I was playing the role of Henry's wife. What started as protection from pitying looks became something more complicated with every passing minute. Henry was amazing at pretending. His hand rested lightly on my back as he introduced me to New York's richest people, calling me the brilliant editor who keeps our bestseller list full. "You're really good at this," I whispered as we danced, keeping a respectful distance even though his hand was warm on my waist. "At dancing?" His eyes twinkled with humor. "At pretending." I looked at his face, searching for clues. Most CEOs I've met aren't good actors. Henry spun me gently, bringing me back slightly closer. "Who says I'm pretending?" The question hung in the air, heavy with meaning I didn't dare think about. I changed the subject quickly. Your speech was beautiful. I didn't know you and Walter were so close. Something sad flickered in Henry's face. We were once. Time and circumstances create distance even between old friends. What changed? He hesitated. Success changes relationships. People expect things from you, or they think you've changed when you haven't. His voice got quieter. That's why this is nice. You don't treat me like I'm just a rich guy. I laughed softly. That's because I saw you spill coffee all over yourself when the elevator jerked last Christmas. You cursed like a sailor while wearing a reindeer tie. Henry's surprised laugh was genuine. You remember that? Hard to forget. His smile softened into something real. See, that's exactly what I mean. When the dance ended, I saw Rose yawning by the dessert table. I should get her to bed. It's way past her bedtime. Henry quietly gave me a key card. Suite 1217. Take your time. I'll make excuses if anyone asks. Thank you, I said, feeling like those words weren't enough for all his kindness. 30 minutes later, after getting a very tired Rose into pajamas and tucking her into one of the suite's 2 bedrooms, I stood in the huge living room feeling out of place. The suite was bigger than my entire apartment, with giant windows showing all of glittering Manhattan. I took off my uncomfortable shoes and walked to the window, pressing my hand against the cool glass. I tried to understand this weird night. A soft knock on the door startled me. I opened it to find Henry. His bow tie was undone and hanging around his neck. Sorry to bother you, he said, staying in the hallway. I forgot my overnight bag. Oh, of course. I moved aside to let him in. Henry got a leather bag from the closet, then stopped, like he didn't want to leave. How's Rose? Fast asleep. She thinks this place is a princess castle, I said with a smile. He smiled too, but something in his face looked guarded now. The easy friendship from the dance floor was fading. Henry, why are you really doing this? I asked, unable to hold back the question. The pretending, the sweet, it's generous, but you're wondering what I want in return. He set down his bag, his face unreadable. Would you believe me if I said I was just being kind? In my experience, powerful men aren't kind without a reason. Something hardened in his eyes. That says more about the men you've known than about me. I crossed my arms defensively. You can't blame me for being careful. You're my boss, Henry. This whole situation is complicated. Is that why you've turned down every promotion I've offered you for the past 2 years? I stared at him, genuinely shocked. What are you talking about? Henry ran his hand through his hair, messing it up. 3 times, Margaret. 3 times I approved moving you up to senior editor with a big raise. And 3 times you said no without even talking to HR about it. I felt like the floor was tilting. That's impossible. I never got any promotion offers. Henry went very still. What did you just say? I've never been offered a promotion at Bennett and Associates, not once. The silence grew thick as we both understood at the same time. George Morgan, we said together. George Morgan was the editorial director, the man directly above me. He'd made it clear he didn't like me from day one. He'd taken credit for my work more than once, and he was Henry's oldest friend. He told me you weren't interested in moving up, Henry said slowly, a muscle in his jaw twitching. That you preferred your current job because of Rose, because it gave you flexibility. I felt cold anger building inside me. And you believed him without ever asking me? He's been with the company since before I took over. We've known each other 20 years. Henry's face darkened. But that ends Monday morning. What does? His career at Bennett and Associates. Henry's voice was flat, leaving no room for argument. I've suspected for a while that George was manipulating things for his own benefit, but this crosses a line. I sank onto the sofa, overwhelmed. This explains so much. The way he's been undermining me, moving my projects to other editors. I looked up at Henry. Do you know he took the Montana Sky author away from me just last week? After I spent a year building that relationship. Henry's face shifted from anger to something more calculating. Is that why you called in sick last Friday? Your first sick day in 3 years. I felt my cheeks get hot. I needed time to process. That series meant a lot to me. Henry sat beside me, careful to leave space between us. I had no idea this was happening. But it stops now. He hesitated, then added more quietly. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I should have paid closer attention. The honesty in his voice surprised me. This wasn't the distant CEO from meetings. This was someone else. Someone taking responsibility, showing real regret. Why do you care so much? I asked before I could stop myself. I'm just one editor among dozens. Henry looked away. Because I started as an editor too, before business school, before climbing the corporate ladder. I know what it means to love books, to fight for stories you believe in. He turned back to me, his eyes intense. And because I've watched your work, Margaret, the authors you discover, the manuscripts you fight for, they're always something special. The unexpected praise left me speechless. Before I could respond, a small voice came from the bedroom doorway. Mommy, I had a bad dream. Rose stood there in her Disney princess pajamas, holding her stuffed rabbit. Her eyes got big when she saw Henry. Mr. Magic Man, are you having a sleepover too? I tensed, but Henry smoothly knelt to Rose's level. No, sweetheart. I just stopped by to make sure you and your mom were comfortable. What was your bad dream about? Rose walked closer. There was a dragon under the bed. That's serious, Henry agreed, looking just as grave as she did. But I happen to know that dragons are terribly afraid of brave flower girls, especially ones who know magic. I don't know any magic, Rose whispered, but her fear was already fading. Sure you do. Remember this? Henry reached into his pocket and pulled out a quarter, doing the same trick from earlier. As Henry patiently taught Rose the simple magic trick, I watched them with tears threatening to fall. My daughter, who was usually shy around strangers, especially men, was giggling and trying to copy his movements. What surprised me most was Henry's patient gentleness. He encouraged every attempt with real warmth, not fake praise. When Rose finally did the trick right, or close enough for a 5-year-old, her face lit up with joy. Now the dragon will be scared of me. Absolutely terrified, Henry confirmed. Want me to check under the bed just to be sure? After checking for dragons and 2 more magic demonstrations, Rose let me tuck her back in bed. When I came back to the living room, Henry was standing by the window again, looking thoughtful. Thank you for that, I said quietly. You didn't have to be so kind to her. It wasn't kindness. I enjoyed it. He turned to face me. She's a remarkable child. She is. I hesitated, then added, her father has never met her. He left before I even knew I was pregnant. Henry's face stayed carefully neutral. His loss. I used to think so. I sat back on the sofa. The truth is, it was probably for the best. Frank wasn't exactly father material. Was he mean to you? Henry's question was gentle but direct. Not physically, just... I searched for the right words. Selfish. He thought his big break as a musician was just around the corner while I paid all the bills. I gave a bitter laugh. The irony is, he finally did get that record deal 6 months after leaving. I saw his face on a billboard in Times Square last year. Understanding showed in Henry's eyes. Your ex is Frank Delaney? My niece loves his music. I nodded. No wonder you're careful around ambitious men. The observation was too accurate. I changed the subject. It's getting late. You should go before people start talking. Let 'em talk. Henry's eyes held mine. Unless you want me to go. The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. For one reckless moment, I thought about asking him to stay, not as my pretend husband or my boss, but as the man who had shown me glimpses of someone worth knowing. Instead, I stood up. This has been unexpected, but we should remember who we are on Monday morning. Henry stood too, picking up his bag. At the door, he paused. You know, you never answered my earlier question about whether I was really pretending. Before I could respond, he was gone, leaving me alone with the question that would keep me awake long into the night. What I couldn't know was that Henry had secrets of his own, secrets that would soon threaten everything we had begun to build. Monday morning arrived like a splash of cold water. I walked into Bennett & Associates Publishing with Rose's sticky goodbye kiss still warm on my cheek. My mind kept replaying every moment from the wedding weekend. I'd spent Sunday going back and forth between thinking about every moment with Henry and firmly reminding myself that it had all been an act, a convenient arrangement that was now over. The elevator doors opened to show George Morgan himself. His smug expression soured when he saw me. "Margaret, recovered from your illness, I see," he said snidely. I stepped inside, refusing to be intimidated. "Good morning, George." "Yes, thank you," he snorted. "I'll need the Mitchell manuscript on my desk by noon. Marketing has questions." I kept my professional smile, even though I felt frustrated. The Mitchell manuscript was another book I'd discovered that George had claimed for himself. Of course, though I should mention, the author specifically asked for my feedback on the new chapters. George's smile tightened. "I'm sure you can forward any notes to me." The elevator stopped at our floor. As I moved to leave, George added, "Oh, and the quarterly review meeting has been moved up. Hayes wants all department heads in the conference room at 10. Something in his tone caught my attention. Just department heads. George's smile turned mean. "Don't worry your pretty little head about executive matters, Margaret." The doors closed on his condescending face, leaving me angry in the hallway. He'd been undermining my career for years, and I'd let him. Partly because, as a single mother, I was afraid of making trouble. Partly because I'd never had proof until Henry's revelation. At 9:57, my phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. "Conference room, 10 a.m. Don't be late." My heart skipped. How did Henry get my personal number? More importantly, why was he asking me to come to a meeting specifically for department heads? At 10:01, I slipped into the conference room where all of Bennett's leadership was already there. George's face showed shock, then barely hidden fury. Henry sat at the head of the table, perfect in a charcoal suit, looking nothing like the relaxed man who taught Rose magic tricks 2 nights ago. "Ms. Sullivan, thank you for joining us," Henry said professionally, with none of the warmth I'd grown used to. "Please, take a seat." I chose the only empty chair, directly across from George, whose eyes kept darting between me and Henry with growing suspicion. "Before we begin," Henry continued, "I'd like to announce some changes effective immediately." His eyes swept the room, commanding and firm. "George Morgan will be leaving his role as editorial director." Stunned silence fell over the room. George's face went pale. "In the interim, Margaret Sullivan will take over his responsibilities while we evaluate permanent restructuring options." I froze, certain I'd heard wrong. Across the table, George half rose from his chair. "This is outrageous. On what grounds?" "On the grounds of deliberately sabotaging company operations, withholding promotion opportunities from qualified staff, and lying to senior management," Henry interrupted, his tone ice cold. My office has compiled a detailed report which HR will review with you after this meeting. I sat motionless as whispers erupted around me. Henry continued the meeting with ruthless efficiency, discussing quarterly projections and marketing initiatives as if he hadn't just dropped a bomb in my professional life. Throughout the hour, I could feel George's poisonous glare promising revenge. When the meeting ended, Henry asked me to stay. As the room emptied, George lingered in the doorway, his face dark with rage. "You'll regret this, Hayes," he said quietly. "Both of you will." After the door closed, I turned to Henry. "What just happened?" He loosened his tie slightly, the only sign that the confrontation affected him. "Justice, I hope. Though perhaps I should have warned you first. Perhaps." I struggled to keep my voice level. "You just put a target on my back in front of the entire executive team. George has powerful friends in this industry. So do I." Henry's expression softened slightly. "Margaret, you earned this promotion 3 times over. The work you've done despite George's interference proves you're more than qualified. That's not the point." I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache coming. "This looks like favoritism, Henry. People will talk." "Let them. Your work will speak for itself." "Easy for you to say. You're not the single mother who suddenly appears to be sleeping her way up the corporate ladder." The harsh words hung between us, impossible to take back. Henry's face closed off. "Is that what you think this is?" he asked quietly. I sighed, immediately regretting my outburst. "No, but it's what everyone else will think." Which is exactly why I asked HR to conduct a thorough review of George's communications before making any announcements. Henry slid a folder across the table. "Evidence of his systematic suppression of your advancement, documented and dated. This promotion is based solely on merit, and anyone who suggests otherwise will have a very uncomfortable conversation with our legal team." I opened the folder, stunned by the comprehensive paper trail. "How did you get all this so quickly?" "I've had suspicions about George for months. Your situation simply gave me the catalyst to investigate thoroughly." He hesitated. "This has nothing to do with this weekend, Margaret. I give you my word." Something in his earnest face made me want to believe him. "Thank you, but this doesn't solve the practical problems. I have a 5-year-old daughter, Henry. The editorial director position requires late nights, weekend work, travel." "All negotiable," he interrupted. "Bennett and Associates needs to modernize its approach to working parents anyway. You can set the precedent." Before I could respond, Henry's assistant knocked and entered. "Mr. Hayes, your 11 o'clock is waiting. And Miss Sullivan, HR would like to see you about transition details." The moment broken, I gathered my things. At the door, I paused. "For what it's worth, thank you for believing in me." Henry's smile was brief but genuine. "Prove me right, Margaret. That's all the thanks I need." The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind. I worked in my new role, and just like Henry promised, my position came with flexibility for Rose's schedule. Though the workload still left me tired most evenings, I saw little of the CEO directly. Our interactions were limited to formal meetings where he was scrupulously professional. 3 weeks after my promotion, I was working late, reviewing contracts for a major book deal, when there was a knock at my office door. Henry stood there, his suit jacket gone, sleeves rolled up. "Still here?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Where's Rose tonight?" "Sleepover with her cousin." I put down my pen. "I'm taking advantage of the rare freedom to catch up." He nodded. "Have you eaten?" The question surprised me. "I had a granola bar around 6. "That's not dinner. Come on." He straightened. "There's a Thai place around the corner that stays open late." I hesitated. "Henry, I don't think that's a good idea." "It's just food, Margaret." His face stayed carefully neutral. Between colleagues. Against my better judgment, I agreed. 20 minutes later, we sat in a quiet booth in the back of a tiny restaurant. The rich scent of lemongrass and curry surrounded us. Away from the office, some of the tension between us eased as we discussed manuscripts and industry gossip. "You've done remarkable work these past weeks," Henry said as we finished our meal. "The Morrison deal alone would have justified your promotion." I smiled, letting myself feel proud. It feels good to finally have the authority to back my instincts. Speaking of authority, Henry set down his fork, his face growing serious. "There's something you should know. George has been meeting with executives at Paragon Press." My stomach tightened. Paragon was our biggest competitor. You think he's giving them information? "I know he is." Henry's voice hardened. "Specifically, he's targeting your authors, trying to convince them to break contracts and move to Paragon. He can't do that. The non-compete in his severance is being violated, yes," Henry sighed. "Unfortunately, proving it requires catching him in the act, which is proving difficult." I pushed my plate away, no longer hungry. The Montana Sky author called me yesterday. Said she'd received a better offer but wouldn't say from whom. Paste.txt. That fits the pattern. Henry reached across the table, briefly touching my hand before pulling back. "I'm sorry to burden you with this, but I needed you to know what we're up against." The simple touch lingered like a brand. I forced myself to focus on the business threat rather than the confusing feelings I had for him. "What do? We fight back." Henry's eyes gleamed with determination. "Starting with the author retreat this weekend, in the Catskills." I blinked. "That's in 3 days. I can't possibly." "Bring Rose," Henry said simply. "The resort has excellent childcare facilities, and this retreat is crucial for securing our relationships with key authors. If George is making moves, we need to counter them immediately." Paste.txt. "Henry, I can't just—" "Margaret," his voice softened. "I'm not asking as your boss right now. I'm asking as someone who believes in you and knows what you're capable of. We need you there." The way he said "we" sent a complicated shiver through me. 3 days in the mountains with Henry, surrounded by authors and industry people, with Rose in tow. It was both exciting and terrifying. "I'll need to make arrangements," I said finally. His answering smile made it worth the trouble I knew would follow. Paste.tst. Friday afternoon, Rose and I checked into Lakeview Lodge, a fancy resort in the autumn-painted mountains. The retreat's welcome reception was already happening in the main hall, leaving us to check in alone. Paste.txt. "I'm sorry, Miss Sullivan, but we don't have a reservation under your name," the receptionist said apologetically. I frowned. "That's impossible. Bennett and Associates Publishing booked rooms. I should be on the list with the other editors." The woman checked again, shaking her head. "I'm showing all the Bennett rooms as assigned, but there's nothing for Sullivan. And I'm afraid we're fully booked this weekend with the retreat and a wedding." Rose tugged at my jacket. "Mom, I'm hungry. You promised dinner." I felt a headache starting. After a crazy day of preparation and a 3-hour drive with a restless 5-year-old, this was the last thing I needed. "Is there anything available nearby? Another hotel?" "Not within 30 miles, I'm afraid." The receptionist's sympathetic smile didn't help. "Leaf season is our busiest time." "What seems to be the problem?" Henry's voice came from behind me, deep and concerned. I turned to find him approaching, looking unfairly handsome in casual clothes, dark jeans and a blue sweater that emphasized his broad shoulders. "There's been a mistake with the reservation," I explained. "Apparently, I don't have a room." Henry's brow furrowed. "That's impossible. I confirmed the bookings myself yesterday." The receptionist's eyes widened as she recognized the CEO. "Mr. Hayes, I assure you, we've assigned all the rooms requested by your company. Perhaps there was a miscommunication." A terrible suspicion formed in my mind. Or perhaps it wasn't a mistake at all, I said quietly, for Henry's ears only. George still has contacts in administrative support. Understanding darkened Henry's face. He turned back to the receptionist. What about my accommodation? I believe I'm in the lakeside suite. Yes, sir, the presidential suite with 2 bedrooms. Henry nodded decisively. Perfect. Miss Sullivan and her daughter will be staying there. Please arrange for her luggage to be brought up immediately. Henry, no, I protested. We can't share a suite. It's inappropriate. It's a 2-bedroom suite with a living area larger than my first apartment, he countered. Completely appropriate. Unless you'd prefer to drive back to the city tonight. Paste.txt. Rose, who had been quietly watching, suddenly perked up. Are we having a sleepover with Mr. Magic Man? Henry's serious face melted into a warm smile as he crouched to Rose's level. Hello there, brave flower girl. I heard you might teach me some new magic tricks this weekend. Paste.txt. As Rose enthusiastically launched into describing a card trick she'd learned from YouTube, I watched them with growing gratitude and worry. Henry had just maneuvered us into an arrangement that would definitely raise eyebrows among our colleagues. What worried me more was how natural it felt. The 3 of us together, like a family, like something I'd stopped letting myself want years ago. It's settled then, Henry said, straightening and offering Rose his hand. Shall we go find some dinner for this hungry magician? As we walked toward the restaurant, I couldn't shake the feeling we were being watched. I glanced back to find a man staring at us intently from across the lobby. A man I recognized instantly despite never meeting him in person. George Morgan had just arrived at the retreat, and the look in his eyes promised that my complicated weekend had just become dangerous. That evening, after Penny had been settled with the resort's children's program for a supervised dinner and movie, Rebecca found herself attending the welcome reception with growing unease. The main hall buzzed with conversations between authors and publishing executives, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Henry appeared at her elbow, 2 glasses of wine in hand. You look tense, he observed quietly, offering her one of the glasses. Daniel's here somewhere. I can feel him plotting. She accepted the wine gratefully, taking a sip to steady her nerves. Let him plot. Henry's voice was low enough that only she could hear. We have the advantage. These authors trust you, Margaret. They've seen your work, your dedication. Daniel can make offers all he wants, but loyalty isn't bought overnight. Before she could respond, a tall woman with elegantly streaked gray hair approached them, her face lighting with genuine pleasure. Henry James Bennett! I was beginning to think you were avoiding the mingling portion of these events entirely. She turned her warm smile to Margaret. And you must be the new editorial director I've heard so much about. Margaret Sullivan. Yes, I'm Florence Winters. Margaret nearly dropped her wine glass. Florence Winters was literary royalty, the best-selling author whose historical romance series had put Bennett and Associates on the map 15 years ago. Her books had sold over 20 million copies worldwide. Ms. Winters, it's an honor, Margaret managed, extending her hand. Your work on the Bedford Chronicles inspired me to pursue publishing. Florence waved away the formality. Florence, please. And who is the young lady I saw you with earlier? Such a charming child. That's my daughter, Rose. She's 5, Margaret explained, warmth flooding her chest at the memory of Henry teaching Rose card tricks in the suite before they'd come downstairs. Florence looked between Margaret and Henry with shrewd, knowing eyes. You make a lovely family. How refreshing to see Bennett executives who understand the importance of balance. Before Margaret could correct the misunderstanding, Florence had effectively claimed their conversation, keeping other retreat attendees, including a fuming George Morgan watching from across the room, at bay. Throughout the reception, Margaret found herself increasingly impressed by how seamlessly Henry adapted to the situation. He guided conversations with practiced ease, always managing to highlight Margaret's accomplishments without making it seem like favoritism. Several authors specifically requested meetings with her, impressed by the passion Henry described in her work. "Your husband speaks very highly of you," one author commented during a brief private moment. "You're lucky to have such a supportive partner." Margaret's correction died on her lips as she caught sight of George across the room, clearly listening. "Oh, we're not actually married. We're colleagues." The author looked confused. "But the way he looks at you." "It's complicated," Margaret said with a tight smile, excusing herself to find the restroom. She was washing her hands when the bathroom door opened and George Morgan entered, clearly having waited for her to be alone. "This is the ladies' room, George," she said coldly, reaching for a paper towel. "Relax. I'm just here to talk." He leaned against the door, blocking her exit. "I wanted to congratulate you on your little promotion. Quite the accomplishment for someone who was pushing papers just a month ago." "If you have something to say, say it." Margaret refused to be intimidated. George smiled, but there was no warmth in it, just a friendly warning, colleague to colleague. Playing house with Henry might seem like a smart career move, but these things have a way of blowing up, especially when people start digging into motivations. "I have no idea what you're talking about." Margaret's heart pounded, but she kept her voice steady. "Don't you?" George pushed off from the door, moving closer. "Ask Henry about the Dartmouth bet. Ask him how much money he stands to win by getting a single mother into his bed. It's quite the story, really. Very entertaining." Before Margaret could respond, George was gone, leaving her shaking with a mixture of anger and doubt. A bet. The word echoed in her mind as she made her way back to the reception on unsteady legs. Henry found her almost immediately. "Everything okay? You look pale." "Just tired. Long day." She couldn't meet his eyes, George's words poisoning every warm feeling she'd begun to develop. "I think I should check on Rose. I'll come with you." Henry moved to follow, but she stopped him with a hand on his arm. "No, you should stay. Network. Isn't that why we're here?" Her voice came out sharper than intended. Confusion flickered across Henry's face. "Margaret, what happened? Did someone say something to you?" "I just need some air." She pulled away, weaving through the crowd toward the exit. Back in the suite, Margaret found Rose sleeping peacefully in the bedroom, exhausted from her evening activities. She stood in the doorway, watching her daughter's chest rise and fall, trying to quiet the turmoil in her mind. A bet. Could Henry's interest in her really be part of some decades-old college game? It seemed absurd, yet doubt crept in like poison. How else to explain the sudden attention from a man who had barely acknowledged her existence for 3 years? Her laptop sat on the desk in the living area. Almost without thinking, she opened it and navigated to her email. There, sent just 20 minutes ago, was a message from an unfamiliar address with the subject line, "Proof of Bennett's manipulation." Against every instinct screaming at her to delete it, Margaret clicked it open. Several attached photos loaded, images clearly taken with a telephoto lens through restaurant windows. There she was, with Henry and Rose at their dinner earlier, looking for all the world like a family unit. The accompanying message was brief but chilling. "Did he tell you about the bet?" 20 years ago at Dartmouth, Henry and his fraternity brothers wagered on who could seduce women from every academic department. Publishing studies was Henry's target. "You're just another conquest, another notch, another payday." The game never ended. It just evolved. A friend who thought you deserved to know the truth. Margaret stared at the screen, nausea rising in her throat. Publishing studies, her major in college. The coincidence felt too specific to be fabricated. Her phone buzzed with a text from Henry. "Where did you go? I'm worried. Can we talk?" She set the phone down without responding, the email's ugly accusations echoing in her mind. She needed time to think, to process both her growing feelings for Henry and this disturbing revelation. By dawn, Margaret had made a decision. She woke Rose early, packed their bags, and left a brief note for Henry on the suite's kitchen counter. Family emergency, had to return to the city, will explain later. It wasn't entirely a lie. Her family's emotional well-being was indeed at stake. The drive back to Brooklyn gave her time to think, to examine every interaction with Henry through this new, darker lens. Part of her wanted to dismiss the email as George's desperate attempt to sabotage her relationship with Henry. But another part, the part that had been abandoned by Frank, whispered that powerful men played by different rules. Rose dozed in the back seat, occasionally waking to ask questions Margaret couldn't properly answer. Why did we leave? When will we see Mr. Henry again? Each innocent query felt like a knife twisting in her chest. By Monday morning, Margaret had resolved to confront Henry directly. She couldn't continue working under these circumstances without clearing the air. She arrived at the office early, steeling herself for the inevitable encounter, only to find an urgent message from Henry's assistant requesting her immediate presence in his office. The elevator ride felt interminable. When she finally reached the executive floor, Henry's assistant looked up with red-rimmed eyes. "Oh, Miss Sullivan, thank goodness you're here. Have you not heard the news?" Margaret's stomach dropped. What news? "Mr. Bennett was in a car accident yesterday morning. He's at Manhattan Memorial in intensive care." The assistant's voice broke slightly. "He was driving back from the Catskills when he hit a patch of black ice on the mountain road." The room spun around Margaret as details filtered through her shock. Early Sunday morning, guardrail failure. Critical but stable condition. All she could think was that he had been driving back early, likely because of her abrupt departure. Is he? Will he? She couldn't form the complete question. The doctors say the next 72 hours are critical. The assistant dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Only family is allowed to visit right now. Margaret somehow made it back to her office before the tears came. She'd run away without giving Henry a chance to explain. And now he might die without ever knowing why she'd left, without understanding that despite her doubts, she'd been falling for him. The next 3 days passed in a blur of guilt and fear. Margaret threw herself into work during the day, managing both her responsibilities and fielding the constant questions about Henry's condition. At night, she held Rose while explaining that Mr. Henry was sick and needed time to get better. She called the hospital twice daily, only to be told that Henry's condition was unchanged and that she wasn't on the approved visitor list. Being not family had never felt more isolating. On Thursday afternoon, as Margaret sat in her office reviewing contracts with mechanical efficiency, her assistant announced an unexpected visitor. "Miss Sullivan, there's a Miss Bennett here to see you. She says she's Henry's sister." Margaret looked up to find a woman with Henry's same dark hair and gray eyes, though her expression held none of his warmth. "Dorothy Bennett." The woman introduced herself with cool precision. "My brother regained consciousness this morning and has been asking for you. Quite insistently, in fact." Relief flooded through Margaret so powerfully she had to grip her desk for support. "He's awake? The doctors say he'll recover." Dorothy's assessing gaze reminded Margaret uncomfortably of being examined under a microscope. "Apparently, my brother is too stubborn to die before resolving whatever situation exists between you two. He mentioned something about a misunderstanding involving George Morgan and an old college bet." Margaret's stomach dropped. "So it's true." Dorothy's expression softened slightly. "I think you should hear the full story from Henry himself. My car is waiting downstairs if you'd like to accompany me to the hospital." "What about Rose?" Margaret glanced at the clock. "I need to pick her up from school in 2 hours." "Bring her." Dorothy's tone brooked no argument. "From what Henry's told me, she'll want to see him too." An hour later, After collecting a worried Rose from school, Margaret stood hesitantly in the doorway of a private hospital room. Henry looked pale against the white sheets, a bandage covering part of his forehead, his left arm in a cast, but unmistakably alive and alert. Margaret. Her name on his lips sounded like both a prayer and a plea. You came. She approached the bed cautiously, Rose clinging to her hand. Your sister can be very persuasive. Dorothy has that effect on people. A ghost of his usual smile appeared, wincing slightly with the effort. Usually she's scaring them away from me, not bringing them to my bedside. Mr. Henry! Rose suddenly broke free, rushing to the bedside. You got hurt! I made you a card with dragons on it so they'd be scared and leave you alone. Henry's face lit up, despite his obvious pain. That's very powerful magic, Rose. I'm already feeling better just knowing you made it for me. As Rose carefully placed her glitter-covered creation on his bedside table, chattering about all the special spells she'd put into it, Dorothy quietly excused herself, leaving the three of them alone. Rose, sweetie, why don't you sit in that chair and color while I talk to Mr. Henry? Margaret suggested gently, pulling out the coloring book and crayons she always kept in her purse. Once Rose was settled and absorbed in her artwork, Margaret turned back to Henry. About the email, the bet. Her voice was barely above a whisper. He closed his eyes briefly. George's final attempt to drive a wedge between us. Clever of him to use a partial truth rather than an outright lie. Margaret tensed. So there was a bet. 20 years ago in college. Henry shifted carefully, pain flickering across his features. Walter, George, and I made ridiculous wagers about everything. One night, particularly drunk, we bet on which of us would be first to date someone from every academic department at Princeton. He met her eyes directly. Juvenile, objectifying, and something I'm not proud of. But it ended there, Margaret. I never collected on it, never pursued anyone for that purpose, and it has absolutely nothing to do with you. Paste.txt. Then why would George bring it up now? Margaret asked, though she already suspected the answer. Paste.txt. Because he knew it would sound plausible enough to make you doubt me. Henry reached for her hand with his uninjured one. Margaret, I've spent 3 years watching you from a professional distance, watching you fight for authors you believe in, seeing your integrity and talent, your dedication to Rose. The wedding was just an excuse to finally approach you, to see if there might be something worth exploring between us. What I feel for you has nothing to do with ancient history and everything to do with who you are. The sincerity in his eyes made her want to believe him. But you barely spoke to me before the wedding. 3 years, Henry. Paste.txt. Because you reported to George, and because I was trying to maintain professional boundaries. His grip on her hand tightened. Do you really think I didn't notice you? Your presentations and manuscript meetings, the way you advocated for your authors, how you always had ink stains on your fingers from making notes and margins. I noticed everything, Margaret. I was just trying to be ethical about the power dynamic between us. Margaret felt tears threatening. And then I ran away without giving you a chance to explain. You nearly died because of me. I nearly died because of black ice and my own stubbornness in driving back in bad weather. Henry's voice was gentle, but firm. Not because of you. Though I'll admit your note terrified me. I thought I'd lost you before we even had a chance. Look! Rose suddenly appeared beside the bed, holding up her finished coloring page. I made you a picture of our family. There's you and Mommy and me, and we're all holding hands so the dragons can't get us. Margaret's breath caught as she looked at the crayon drawing. 3 stick figures with enormous smiles. Rose had been so careful with the details, giving Henry his gray eyes and Margaret her dark hair. That's beautiful, sweetheart, Margaret managed, her voice thick with emotion. Henry studied the drawing with unmistakable tenderness. This is the best medicine anyone's given me, Rose. Thank you. Rose beamed. Does this mean you can come home with us? Mom says you have to stay in the hospital, but our apartment is really close. You could sleep on the couch. Maybe when I'm a little better. Henry glanced at Margaret, a question in his eyes. If your mom says it's okay. Margaret found herself at a crossroads. Trust this man who had shown her nothing but respect and kindness, or retreat behind the walls that had protected her since Frank's abandonment. She thought of the past month, of Henry's patience with Rose, his support of her career, the way he'd fought for her against George's sabotage. I need you to understand something, she said finally, squeezing his hand. Rose isn't just part of my life, she is my life. Anyone I allow close to me has to accept that reality completely. Margaret, Henry's expression softened. I adore Rose. Her magic tricks, her dragon fears, her endless questions about how books are made. She's extraordinary, just like her mother. And I would never ask you to compromise what you've built for her. And the professional complications? Margaret pressed. I won't sacrifice the career I've worked so hard for, even for feelings that terrify me. I wouldn't expect you to. Henry smiled despite his injuries. In fact, I'd be disappointed if you did. We'll figure out the boundaries. Companies have policies for managing relationships between executives. We'll follow them to the letter. Your position is based on merit, Margaret, and everyone knows it. Let people talk. Your work speaks for itself. Promise me one more thing. Margaret leaned closer, her voice dropping so Rose couldn't hear. No more secrets. No more old college stories that can be weaponized. If we're going to explore this, whatever this is, I need complete honesty. Complete honesty, Henry agreed solemnly. Starting with this. I'm falling in love with you, Margaret Sullivan. I have been since I watched you fight to include that debut author's unusual fantasy novel in our spring catalog 3 months ago. The one everyone else said was too risky. You were magnificent. Margaret felt her carefully constructed walls crumbling. That's not fair. You can't say things like that when you're lying in a hospital bed looking vulnerable. Would you prefer I wait until I'm back terrorizing the executive team? He managed a weak laugh. I can be quite intimidating when I'm not concussed. Despite everything, Margaret found herself smiling. You're ridiculous. And you're extraordinary. Henry brought her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Take your time deciding what you want, Margaret. I'm not going anywhere. Over the following weeks, as Henry recovered and returned to work with doctors' orders to take it easy, their relationship evolved carefully. They established clear boundaries at the office, professional but warm. Margaret made sure HR was fully informed of their developing relationship and that proper protocols were followed. Outside of work, Henry integrated himself into Margaret and Rose's life with patient deliberation. Saturday morning pancakes became a tradition, with Rose teaching Henry increasingly elaborate magic tricks between bites. He attended Rose's kindergarten play, sitting beside Margaret in the audience and cheering louder than anyone when Rose delivered her 3 lines as tree number 4. The publishing world watched their relationship with intense curiosity, but Margaret's work continued to speak for itself. She closed 3 major deals in as many months, including convincing Florence Winters to renew her contract with Bennett and Associates for an unprecedented 5 more books. George Morgan's attempts at sabotage had failed spectacularly. His breach of his non-compete agreement resulted in legal action that effectively blacklisted him from major publishing houses. Paragon Press quietly settled with Bennett and Associates for attempting to poach contracted authors. 6 months after Henry's accident, he invited Margaret and Rose to his family's beach house in the Hamptons for a long weekend. It was the first time Margaret had seen Henry truly relaxed. barefoot and laughing as he chased Rose across the sand, both of them shrieking when the cold Atlantic waves caught their feet. That evening, after Rose had been tucked into bed in a room decorated with seashells and starfish, Henry found Margaret on the terrace overlooking the moonlit ocean. He carried 2 glasses of wine and wore an expression she couldn't quite read. "You look nervous." Margaret accepted the wine with a smile. "Should I be worried?" "Maybe." He set down his glass and reached into his pocket. "Margaret Sullivan, I've been thinking about how to do this for weeks. I consulted 3 of my female executives about what would be appropriate, read several articles about blended families, and even asked Rose for her opinion." "You asked Rose?" Margaret's heart began to race. "I did. Last Saturday, when you were at the grocery store, Henry dropped to one knee on the weathered wooden deck. She gave me very specific instructions, actually. I'm supposed to tell you that she thinks it would be, and I quote, super cool if we all lived together and I taught her more magic. She also requests a puppy, but I told her we'd negotiate that point later." Margaret's hands were shaking as Henry pulled out a small velvet box. "I'm not asking you to give up anything you've built. I'm asking if I can be part of it, part of your life, part of Rose's life, part of whatever future you're willing to imagine with me." He opened the box to reveal a simple but stunning ring, a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds. "I know you're practical, so this is insured, sized correctly according to the ring you wear on your right hand, and the sapphire represents wisdom and loyalty. The jeweler gave me a whole speech." His voice softened. "Will you marry me, Margaret? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that I'm worth trusting?" Through tears, Margaret nodded. "Yes, yes, but only because Rose approved. We can't disappoint her." Henry stood, sliding the ring onto her finger before pulling her into a kiss that tasted like salt air and new beginnings. When they finally pulled apart, both were laughing. "Should we tell her now? She's going to be impossible to put to bed." Margaret wiped at her eyes. "Let her sleep. We'll tell her in the morning." Henry wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest as they looked out at the ocean. "Right now, I just want to hold you and appreciate that you said yes despite every reason you had to run away." They stood that way for a long time, the waves providing a gentle soundtrack to their comfortable silence. Behind them, through the glass doors, they could see Rose's room, where a small nightlight cast gentle shadows. "I never thought I'd have this." Margaret fastest spoke, her voice quiet. "A partner who loves my daughter as much as I do, who understands that she comes first. She'll always come first." Henry pressed a kiss to her temple. "That's one of the things I love most about you. You're fiercely protective of the people you love. I feel lucky to be included in that circle." "Even when I'm difficult? When I panic and run away and nearly cost you your life?" Margaret's guilt about the accident still surfaced occasionally. Even then, especially then, Henry turned her in his arms to face him. "Margaret, you had every reason to be cautious. Your trust isn't something I take lightly. I'm going to spend every day earning it." The next morning, Rose's shriek of joy when they told her the news could probably be heard across the entire beach. She insisted on calling everyone she knew, starting with Aunt Ruth and progressing through her entire kindergarten class. By noon, Margaret's phone was flooded with congratulatory messages. Florence Winters called personally. "I told you at that retreat that I saw this coming." Her voice was warm with satisfaction. "When's the wedding?" "I expect a prominent invitation." "We haven't even discussed dates yet." Margaret laughed, watching as Henry helped Rose build an elaborate sandcastle. "Well, don't wait too long. Life is short, and you two have already wasted enough time dancing around each other." Florence paused. For what it's worth, dear, you've chosen well. Henry Bennett is one of the good ones. As spring turned to summer, Margaret and Henry navigated the complex logistics of blending their lives. They found a brownstone in Brooklyn with enough space for Rose to have her own room, plus a study for Margaret. Henry insisted on keeping his Manhattan apartment for late work nights, but most evenings found him at the brownstone, helping with homework or cooking dinner while Margaret finished up work calls. The wedding itself was small and intimate, held in the same garden where they'd first pretended to be married at Helen's reception. Rose served as both flower girl and ring bearer, taking her duties with utmost seriousness. When the officiant asked if anyone objected, Rose loudly declared that she definitely didn't object, and could they please hurry up so they could have cake. Dorothy, who had slowly warmed to Margaret over the months, stood as Henry's best person. "We're glad he found you," she told Margaret during the reception. "He's been alone too long, using work as an excuse to avoid connection. You and Rose have changed that." Margaret watched Henry dance with Rose, both of them laughing as he taught her an elaborate spin. "He's changed us too. We didn't realize how much we needed him until he was there." That evening, after Rose had finally been persuaded to sleep in Dorothy's guest room so the newlyweds could have their wedding night alone, Margaret and Henry returned to the brownstone. They stood in the kitchen, still in their wedding clothes, eating leftover cake and talking about nothing in particular. "Did you ever imagine this? When you were sitting alone at that wedding table?" Henry asked, frosting on his lip. Margaret reached up to wipe it away. "Never. I thought I'd be alone forever. That Rose and I would be a team of two, and that was enough. And now?" He pulled her close, swaying slightly as if they were still on the dance floor. "Now I know that sometimes families grow in unexpected ways, that love doesn't follow a script." She smiled up at him. "Though I have to say, if someone had told me that night that the CEO would propose to me 6 months later, I would have thought they were insane. I prefer to think of it as determined." Henry kissed her softly. "I saw something worth fighting for, and I refused to give up." "Even when I made it difficult?" Margaret teased. "Especially then," he laughed. "Where's the fun and easy? Besides, Rose was on my side from the start. She's an excellent wingman." They made their way upstairs, tired but happy, still talking about the day's events and making plans for their honeymoon once Rose's school year ended. As they finally settled into bed, Margaret felt a profound sense of peace. "Henry," she spoke into the darkness. He was already half asleep, one arm draped across her waist. "Thank you for not giving up on me, on us, even when I was too scared to believe in possibilities." He pulled her closer. "Always, Margaret. No matter what comes, I'm not going anywhere. You and Rose are my family now." In Rose's room down the hall, the nightlight continued to glow, casting dragon-protecting shadows across walls now decorated with both her artwork and photos of their growing family. The brownstone settled into comfortable silence, holding within its walls 3 people who had found each other against impossible odds. Sometimes, the best stories began in the most unlikely places. A lonely wedding table, a compassionate gesture, a pretend marriage that became beautifully real. Margaret drifted off to sleep, thinking about how she'd spent years trying to protect her heart, only to discover that true security came not from walls, but from finding someone willing to stand beside you, facing whatever dragons might come. And as Henry had promised that first night, by morning, no one would ever pity Margaret Sullivan again. She had become someone else entirely, someone brave enough to trust, to love, and to believe in the magic of unexpected endings that were really just beautiful beginnings in disguise.